It's been 2 weeks since my last video and a lot has happened behind the headlines. So actions cover childhood vaccines, drinking water, political control over science research, 145,000 American citizen children with detained parents, judges being attacked by name, more people killed in boat strikes, and escalating threats against Cuba. So let's just get into it. So let's start with science and public health. Childhood vaccines are again under threat. So last June, RFK Jr., the health secretary, fired all 17 members of the independent expert panel that has recommended the childhood vaccine schedule to the CDC since 1964. RFK Jr. replaced the panel with people who are more skeptical of vaccines, and that new panel then recommended cutting the number of diseases children are routinely vaccinated against down to 11 from current 17. But in March, a federal judge blocked that. So basically the judge said the changes were arbitrary and Kennedy's appointments likely violated federal law. So the most recent thing is that Trump has signed an executive order that basically tells the CDC it has to cut the vaccine schedule anyway. It's a direct attempt to get around that court ruling. Dr. William Schaffner, who is a member of the former independent panel, said that there's little scientific basis for changing recommendations that have already been rigorously reviewed. Speaking of the CDC, it has also removed its public health guidance on safer sex and harm reduction for Mpox, used to be called monkeypox, from its website. Health experts are concerned that this is part of a kind of a broader pattern of trying to remove medically vetted and really important information that's considered particularly relevant to LGBTQ+ communities. And then RFK Jr., as health secretary, fired the two leaders of the US Preventative Services Task Force. So that's the independent expert panel that decides what preventative screenings and procedures insurance companies have to cover at no cost to their patients. The idea being that if you can prevent something, it's better for the patient, it's better for the insurance company, it's better for the state. So this is things like cancer screening and blood pressure checks. So the panel still exists, but firing its leaders suggests that RFK Jr. is keen to appoint a more ideologically aligned panel. And then you may have heard of PFAS. So these are chemicals in drinking water. They're often kind of called forever chemicals that accumulate in the body, and they've been linked to cancer and other serious health conditions in people. So under Biden, the Environmental Protection Agency instituted rules that put limits on how many of these chemicals there can be in drinking water. But then, over the last 2 weeks, under Trump, the EPA has now announced a plan to rescind those rules, which basically risks less safe drinking water for Americans. The attacks on science have also included attacks on new research. So research underpins innovation, from health, medicine, to energy, to tech, to the environment. But new proposals from the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, is putting more nails in the coffin of the US's status as a world-leading research power. Basically, the OMB has proposed a new rule that would give senior political appointees final say over which research grants get funded, overriding independent peer review. Grants would have to advance the president's policy priorities, and the new rules would also ban research with a diversity or equity focus. They restrict open access publication, and they will also limit international collaborations. And on that, the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, has already told grant recipients that they must now get permission in advance before co-authoring any paper with a researcher at a foreign institution, even if all the work was done in the United States. They've also been told to remove papers with foreign authors from their progress reports. Now, this really matters. So removing foreign co-authors not only erases credit for work already done, it distorts the scientific record and it disincentivizes future collaborations. And speaking as a scientist myself, collaboration is the lifeblood of science, and the more people you can collaborate with, the more perspectives you can get from around the world, the better your science will be. And separately, the National Science Foundation has put future awards on hold, specifically for Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Duke. So these are 4 of the country's leading research universities. So there's a clear pattern here of isolating US science from the rest of the world and politically targeting elite institutions. A recurring theme of the Trump administration is the systematic suppression of dissent. And over the last 2 weeks, we've seen it across Republican primaries, on social media, in the courts, and even in threats against entire cities. So let's start with the Republican primaries, where basically the lesson is clear: oppose Donald Trump at your own peril. Defense Secretary Hegseth kind of started things off by speaking at a campaign rally in Kentucky for Trump's preferred candidate, attacking sitting Republican Congressman Thomas Massie as obstructive and a traitor to his party. A Pentagon official claimed that this didn't breach the Hatch Act, which is the law that prohibits federal employees from engaging in political activities while in office. But it's kind of hard to see how it doesn't. Massie then duly lost his primary, and it wasn't just him. Across all the Republican primaries held over the last 2 weeks, every sitting politician who had opposed Trump in any way at all lost their race after Trump endorsed their rivals. And this includes in Texas, long-serving Republican Senator John Cornyn, who's not exactly a liberal, and he was beaten by Ken Paxton, who was Trump's preferred candidate. The message to pretty much every Republican in office is simply back Trump or else. Trump has also continued his kind of sustained campaign against personal enemies using social media and the courts. So he's been on a bit of a rampage on Truth Social. So he's posted an AI-generated image of prominent Democrats and opponents dressed in orange prison jumpsuits. So that includes people like Barack Obama, Susan Rice, and former FBI Director James Comey. He posted an AI-generated image of Democrat Ro Khanna as a devil, telling Fox News not to allow this sleazebag on their network. Trump attacked federal judge Christopher Cooper and his wife personally for ruling against renaming the Kennedy Arts Center after Trump. He attacked the Supreme Court, calling the court system rigged after its tariff decision. He attacked the New York Times, and he called lawyers who have resigned from government's radical left deep state lunatics. And then Trump refiled his libel suit against the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch, which is a lawsuit that a judge had already dismissed, about a story the Wall Street Journal wrote on a birthday note Trump allegedly wrote for Jeffrey Epstein. I think the attacks on judges are particularly worth noting. So, it's not unusual for politicians to disagree with court rulings, but it's not normal and it's not okay to repeatedly name individual judges and their family members on social media, or to call the entire court system rigged, because it's really undermining the rule of law in your country. Speaking of which, there's the Department of Justice. So that has opened a criminal investigation into E. Jean Carroll. So she's the writer who won 2 civil lawsuits against Trump for sexual assault and defamation. The investigation is focused on whether she committed perjury in her testimony. The DOJ has also opened a separate investigation into the organization that partly funded her lawsuits against Trump. So CNN has described this as the latest in the department's effort to meet Trump's demand to target his personal enemies. And then finally, Homeland Security Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen first privately and then publicly confirmed that the administration is drawing up plans to withdraw Customs and Border Protection officers from international airports in so-called sanctuary cities. So sanctuary cities are places that have declined to cooperate with federal immigration crackdowns. So the cities that could be affected include places like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Seattle, Denver, San Francisco, Boston. And without customs processing, these airports can then effectively not handle any international arrivals or cargo. So Airlines for America, the trade body for major US carriers, have already warned that the plan would have a devastating effect on airline and tourism industries. Even Trump's own transportation secretary, Sean Duffy, called it politically counterproductive. The timing is even more extraordinary because the FIFA World Cup in football, soccer, starts next month, with millions of international visitors expected across the US. And the World Cup final is being held in New Jersey, which is just 12 miles from one of the airports in one of these sanctuary cities. So it hasn't been implemented yet. It may well not happen. But the fact that the administration is openly talking about these plans and threatening democratic cities is just kind of another indication of how far they're prepared to go to use the levers of the state as a political weapon. So now I want to talk about nationalism and what's been going on there over the last 2 weeks. The Brookings Institution is one of the most respected think tanks in the US, and 2 weeks ago it published a report showing that over 145,000 children who are US citizens have had a parent detained during the Trump mass deportation campaign. So this is since January 2025. More than 22,000 of those children saw both parents detained at the same time, and around a third of these children were under 6 years old. So again, these are American citizen children. So who does Trump think deserves to come to the US? Well, this week, the Trump administration has formally raised the refugee cap. So asylum has been closed to virtually every country in the world since Trump took office last January. But he's now raised the cap to admit another 10,000 people. but those slots are reserved exclusively for white South Africans, known as Afrikaners, who Trump claims are facing racially motivated violence in some kind of emergency. The South African government has consistently denied this, and there is no credible evidence of the emergency that Trump has declared. Meanwhile, the deportation program itself is also causing serious harm. So an analysis of ICE data found that the US has deported more than 21,000 people to countries that the State Department itself considers too dangerous for Americans to visit. And the conditions inside immigration detention centres are bad and getting worse. So Camp East Montana in El Paso, Texas, which is the largest immigration detention facility in the country, has seen at least 3 detainee deaths since it opened a year ago, including 1 murder, a measles outbreak lasting nearly a month, and almost 50 violations of detention standards. And that's according to ICE's own inspectors. So now Democratic politicians and immigrant advocates are basically saying this facility has to be closed. And in fact, a lawsuit trying to regulate this facility has been launched this week. Meanwhile, new body camera footage released as part of another lawsuit has shown ICE agents violently arresting farm workers in Oregon using facial recognition technology to identify and target people. The footage is from last October, and really critics are saying that it's direct evidence of racial profiling. And this week, we also learned that nearly 200,000 truck drivers, including many who've spent years working perfectly well in the industry, are at risk of losing their commercial driving licenses under a new Department of Transportation rule, basically disqualifying many foreign-born drivers. The administration has provided no data whatsoever to show that foreign-born commercial drivers pose any specific safety risk. So the rule really appears to be about who those drivers are and not what they've done. Meanwhile, the tone being set from the top is quite chilling. The White House launched a website this week about immigration arrests, where the website is basically copying the famous Star Wars opening crawl. So that is reading on this website: aliens have been walking among us, living in our neighborhoods and interacting with us in our daily lives. They've shopped in the same stores, attended the same classes as our children, and lived a seemingly normal human existence. With one exception, they do not belong here. So finally, foreign aggression. The pressure is ramping up significantly on Cuba, which the US has been blockading for months, blocking new oil imports getting into the country. And Cuba has now used up all of its fuel reserves. The US has recently sanctioned more Cuban officials. A federal grand jury has indicted former Cuban President Raul Castro on murder charges from the 1980s. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has declared Cuba to be a national security threat. Senator Lindsey Graham has been talking about Cuban liberation, and Trump has said that Cuba was on our mind. And then finally, there's been a rapid escalation in drug boat strikes in the Eastern Pacific, alleged drug boat strikes. So the US military has carried out 4 strikes on boats it's accused of carrying drugs in just the last week. So since September, the US has now killed at least 205 people with these strikes. The Pentagon has not provided any evidence that the vessels were actually carrying drugs. The strikes are continuing, the death toll is rising, and there's just no evidence for what they're saying they're striking them for. What I just wanted to highlight is that the last time we saw so many boat strikes in a single week was literally just before Trump attacked Venezuela in January. So that's it for now. All of these actions and more are available on trumpactiontracker.info, and I'll see you in a week or two.